This is the typical risk management cycle. I include it here not because it's an agile thing, but because people who are so this people that may be watching this video may be people who are agile people who are learning about risk management, and they wouldn't know this maybe. Um, so here it is. The first thing you would probably do is identify, and then you assess or evaluate it. You prioritize those things that you've assessed. You respond if there's a response necessary, and then you track. You identify, you evaluate, you prioritize, respond. You just keep going around this circle. Risk has certain language associated with it that has been developed over the years with the folks that do risk. There's people whose whole full-time job it is to do risk management for some organizations that have high risk, right? You want NASA or Boeing to have people who are risk managers. They are concerned about your health, life, and safety. So, um, first, we talk about probability and impact. So, those are the two measuring tools that are usually used in association with any risk. You want to know what's the probability of it happening and what's the impact. Earlier, you saw that the risk burn down showed the impact in days. You saw the risk adjusted backlog showed it in dollars, right? So there's two different ways of looking at the impact. There's lots of ways of looking at the impact. Risk statements. So you should be keeping a risk log. And in that risk log, you would have statements like this. Some event may occur, which may, and so that would be the event. A car may run out of gas, which may result in us not making it to the concert on time. So the which may result in is always there, and then you put the result. So the what's the event and what's the consequence, those change every time. You'll always have the phrase which may result in the middle of it. Makes it easy to make sure you're covering all your bases. A risk is only a risk if you cannot prove that it's going to happen. If you can prove that it is or isn't, then it's not a risk, right? A risk is something that there's a probability of. And again, we talked about this a minute ago, but the difference between a risk and an assumption is a risk with 100% probability, right? So it's something that you just believe with 100% is going to happen. You can't necessarily prove it, but it has 100% probability. And there's things called positive risks. Those are typically looked at as benefits. Upside, they're not really talked about much, but if you wanted to dig into them, feel free to go to the internets and dig around. There's lots of interesting things to be said about them. Negative risk responses, there are four. There's always four. They're the same four. You can either avoid it, transfer it, mitigate it, or accept it. So avoiding it means you do something to make sure that risk doesn't happen. So in the risk of the car running out of gas, you would fill it up with gas, right? And maybe measure the distance to make sure you didn't need to fill it up again. Pay attention to the gas gauge. You may transfer the risk. So to do that, you would maybe have your AAA card. So now I know that if I run out of gas, the AAA guy is going to come and save me. Of course, it usually takes them a long time to get to you, but you might be late for your concert. But that would be transferring the risk. Mitigating it is something to lessen the impact. So maybe you would, what would lessen the impact of running out of gas? Maybe you'd carry a can of gas. That way you could fill it up. Might be risk avoidance, but we'll call that mitigation. And you might just accept it. Yep, we might run out of gas. I accept that might happen. Usually we do that if the risk is A, small and not really worth spending the money to do to mitigate, transfer, or avoid, or B, too big. And it's truly whenever the cost to mitigate, transfer, or avoid is greater than the cost of the risk itself. And I don't mean cost as in dollars, but I mean cost as in the value to you as a person or as an organization. So you will accept a risk when it costs too much to avoid, transfer, or mitigate it, or when the cost is so small that it's not worth worrying about. And a contingency is what happens after a risk happens, right? So we make plans to go, you know what, if something does happen, then we'll do this. So the contingency plan for running out of gas on the way to the concert would be either to use the gas in the trunk that we had in the gas can, or call the AAA guy, or call your buddy who might be able to pick you up and take you there, right? So there's a contingency plan that you have in place, and you might prioritize, the list of contingencies. We're going to do this, or we might do this, or we might do that. It all really depends on the depth, breadth, and consequence of the risk if it were to happen. Okay, so we said the top 3. There's a couple more places to do risk identification. In the initial chartering is a great time to do it, because you're looking at the whole project or whole product that you're going to be creating. Do it when you're doing story mapping. It's a great time to identify risks associated with, each piece of the system span, each piece of the backbone, each piece of the walking skeleton. You might associate risks with those if they're identifiable. During sprint planning, we already mentioned that one. During stand-ups, great time. During retrospectives, wow, of course, that's when you're going to be identifying risks, right? You're going to be bringing those things up in a retrospective when you're talking about how we are working together. So that's a great time to be talking about risks. Classic way of analyzing any kind of risk or situation to find where you might have risks is a SWOT analysis, if you really are wanting to spend some time. This would be something that you would probably do in the chartering phase, in the very initial chartering phase, or maybe when you're doing story mapping, you might want to do a SWOT analysis. Like, okay, this is the product. Now we've mapped the whole thing out. Now let's do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of this approach? What are the weaknesses of this approach? What are the opportunities that it creates, and what are the threats that are associated with doing this? You want to, be looking at internal versus external on that. Usually the top is internal and the bottom are external, meaning the strengths and weaknesses are internal and the opportunities and threats are usually external. You want to be sure you're asking good questions, and I've got several questions on the next 2 slides about this. Take into consideration the perspectives of different stakeholders, right? You have marketing, sales, are the people who are going to be doing support for this? What about your customers? What about your suppliers, your channel partners? Take different people's perspectives into consideration in your SWOT analysis. Also, the quality of the information that you gather has a lot to do with the quality of the facilitation that happens. So get someone who can do a good job facilitating. I love facilitating, and so find somebody who likes to do it and enjoys doing facilitation. Consider different personality types when you're doing a facilitation like this. A good facilitator will take that into consideration, and use multiple methods for generating input, so that your introverts aren't just left with saying nothing because they're being dominated by the extroverts who are just talking all the time, right? So you use different input methods to generate ideas and generate input for the SWOT analysis. And it's possible to oversimplify things, so just be careful. So here we're talking about strengths and weaknesses. These are internal things usually, so I'll just leave these questions up here. You can take a screenshot if you want. I'm not going to read through them, but they're questions that you would be asking in the SWOT analysis about both strengths and about weaknesses. Similarly here, talking about external questions about opportunities that this product or project creates, and the threats associated with it. So, okay, another analysis tool. You've probably heard of Ishikawa. Usually it's a problem-solving tool, right, where you're identifying the root cause of a problem, a defect or a situation that's occurred, and so you use these different categories to identify the defect and what was the root cause analysis. That's what Ishikawa is, a root cause analysis tool. Well, I've flipped it around and I call it reverse Ishikawa, because you can use the same tool, I find, to take a feature or whatever, however you bound the piece of work that you're wanting to analyze, and look at these different headings to identify risks with them. So think about the materials that are going to be used to create the feature. What are the methods? What are the processes we're going to use? What are the machines we're going to use, the tools we're going to use? Who are the people that are involved? What are the risks associated with that? What about the environments we'll be involved in? What about the way it'll be, what about the way it'll be measured, right? What are risks that could be associated with any of those areas? It's just a great way of framing and thinking about your context and identifying risk possibilities in those different contexts. So then you'll look at risks and how do you define the risks that you've identified. In this case that I show here in a second, you'll see I use this probability scale of 1 to 5. We've identified these are the association. I made this up, right? This is just do what you like. Something like that, you decide, right? What's the impact? How do you quantify that? You just need to quantify it some way. So then you have this, you would give associations to this, right? What's the cash value from this to this range? This to this range is a 1. This to this range is a 2. Or delay, same thing. Whatever you determine as your scaling here, you would use on this chart. Then you'd have a probability of 1, or that a developer who knows COBOL might leave. COBOL. Well, this was the actual real. These were actual real risks with one of my clients. So there was the risk that one of their COBOL developers, who's like a really key person who knew their system more than anything, it was a low chance that he might leave, but it would be a high impact because he was the only one that knew the system. So that had a risk rating of 5. Now here you have a vendor that doesn't follow an agile approach, may not be able to deliver late arriving requirements. There's a pretty high probability that would happen, and the impact would be significant to this project. So you can then look on this kind of a chart where you look at probability as this axis and impact as the horizontal axis, and identify where your risks fall. The first 2 were, they're okay, they're in the yellow range, but this one here of the vendor not using an agile approach and late coming requirements being a problem, that's a big deal, right? It's a bigger deal, at least, than something that shows up in the yellow or the green zones. So there you are, talking about